right, everybody. Good morning. It's still morning. I was here a few months ago for Boulder Startup, and I really love Boulder. And I came out, and everybody warned me about the altitude sickness, and I was like, oh, I'll so own the altitude sickness. And the first time I was pretty okay, but last night I totally fell prey to it. So I promise I will never make fun of you for the way you feel when you're hungover ever again. Not fun. So my name is Ashe, Dryden, and I talk a lot about diversity in tech. I myself am a Rubyist. I've been a programmer for 12 years. This is something that's especially important to me because I am a woman, I am a queer person, but also because I care a lot about the people around me, and I want to see everybody have the same access that I've had. So before we get started, I just want to turn on my thing. I just want to thank some people. I actually have been very lucky to be able to kind of tour around the world and talk about this because a lot of companies sponsor me to do this. So it's kind of like my NASCAR wall. I don't work for anybody doing this, so these people enable me to do that, so thank you. So my name is Ashe Dryden. I'm Ashe Dryden pretty much everywhere online. If you have any questions, just as a heads up, I'm hard of hearing. So before the end of the talk, if you don't mind moving forward and speaking really loudly, it would make it easier for me. So what is diversity? We talk a lot about diversity in tech, and we talk a lot about specifically women. We talk about where are the women in tech. And when I say diversity, I mean more than gender. I mean more specifically than women and men. I also mean that diversity being a set of various backgrounds, experiences, and lifestyles that kind of add up to the way that we go through life. The other thing to remember is that diversity is not always visible. There's a lot of things that you can't see about me that make me different than you. So diversity includes things like age, young and old. If you look around the room, you'll notice that a lot of people around you are probably at least 20 years old, 21 years old, and probably the cap is around 45 or 50. And that's a very, very big curve there. So there's a lot of people. I'm sorry if I excluded someone. I heard someone laughing. So there's a very big range of people there that we're missing. It also includes things like physical and mental health, age, ability, sexuality, race, economic class, education. And before we get started, I want to kind of cover a few terms so we can all get on the same page, so you know what I'm talking about, and we can have these conversations later. So intersectionality is the idea that there are a lot of traits about you when you're born or the way that you go through life that kind of change the way that society perceives you and allows you to go through life. Intersectionality is kind of the pancaking effect of all of the different traits. So it's not just being a person of color, it's also being a person of color who has disabilities or who is also queer. The way that the world looks at you is differently than somebody who is white and queer, for instance. So what does that actually mean in terms of people? Well, in the United States, women earn about 80.9% of what men do, and that sounds a little bit better than we have been hearing, but actually this percentage has dropped in the past 3 years, so we've actually gone back a little bit. And this is controlling for all other factors, including education, time in and away from the industry, and experience. So we know what women make. Now, the difference between what Latina women make and white men make is huge. It's really big. I mean, imagine if tomorrow you went into work and your boss said, we've decided to cut your salary basically in half. Would you be able to pay for your house, to take care of your family? It impacts a lot of people. So what else? The unemployment rate in the United States is about 7.5%, depending on who you ask and who you trust. But for the blind community, it's 10 times that. Huge difference, huge difference. So the next term we'll talk about is privilege, and this is something that a lot of us talk about in the social justice movement, so kind of trying to find a way to make people more equal in society. So privilege is basically an unearned advantage that you get for being who you are born or who you grew up to be. So for instance, I myself, I'm a white person. I have a lot of privilege because I'm a white person. The fact that I can stand on this stage and talk to you about something like this as a white person is huge. There are a lot of people who don't have the same kind of opportunities that I do because I'm a white person. So what kinds of things do we get for that privilege? Better education, access to technology at an earlier age. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Higher pay, assumed competency. Not having to prove how smart you are is really important. And seen as a skill set instead of a set of traits. So this is the difference between being a geek and being a girl geek. You don't have to qualify the first one, right? So stereotype threat. Stereotype threat, most people, I think, know what the word stereotype means, but stereotype threat is basically being worried that you'll confirm a stereotype that exists about your group. I think most people have seen this comic before. This is XKCD. On one side, you have, wow, you suck at math, a man talking to another man. On the other, you have, wow, girls suck at math, a man talking to a woman. And unfortunately, this is a negative stereotype that exists about women, that women aren't good at math. I think I'm losing my mic. Women aren't good at programming. And studies have shown that prompting a group based on race or gender and telling them that the opposite group does better than you at a certain thing actually makes them do worse, when in reality, there's no difference. I think I'm going to lose this. Is there a way to fix this? Not have an ear? It makes it so much more visible with orange hair, right? Am I good? Cool. All right. So imposter syndrome. This is something that affects everybody, regardless of race or gender or station in life, sexuality. It's basically the inability to internalize the things that you've been able to succeed at. So you'll hear a lot of things like, I'm really bad at programming, I'm stupid, I don't know how to do this, I could never stand up and talk to people about what I do because people would jump all over me for being wrong. I don't know enough, I could never apply to work at a place like GitHub because I'm just not smart enough. And this is something, like I said, that a lot of people suffer from, and it's really hard to overcome. This is especially pronounced in groups that have a negative stereotype about them because they're listening to what society and the communities are saying about their abilities on top of how they feel about themselves. These people are also less likely to apply for certain jobs, less likely to submit a talk to a conference. They're even less likely to come to a conference. So take a look around you and notice who's missing from your community. So I think one of the last definitions we're going to learn is marginalized. So if you think of like college rule notebook paper, the blue lines and the pink lines, the margin is everything that exists outside of that pink area. And that was kind of like where you drew all of your doodles and all of the stuff that wasn't important. Marginalized people fit into a certain group where their needs and concerns are kind of pushed out past that pink line. They're not given the kinds of time and concern that other groups are. And unfortunately, society teaches us to do this with everyone. And I'm sure that you're sitting there and thinking to yourself, but I'm different, I'm logical and rational. Which, you know, as programmers, we definitely believe about ourselves. And I don't see gender and race. And unfortunately, I don't think this is going to work for me. Are my ears weirdly shaped? Okay. So even scientists and STEM professors do this to each other. There was a study that was done at Yale, and they took two sets of professors there. So these are some of the smartest people in the country, right? And they said, here are two resumes. Tell me who you would rather hire, what you would pay them, and on a scale of 1 to 7, how likely you would be to work with them. They didn't tell them, however, that the two resumes were exactly the same. The only difference was the first name. One was named John and one was named Jennifer. So exactly the same resume. So they went back to them and said, okay, who would you rather hire on a scale of 1 to 7? They gave John a 4 and Jennifer a 3.3. Same resume. They said, okay, what would you pay Jennifer? And what would you pay John? They paid Jennifer 87% of what they paid John. Same resume. The killer part of this is that marginalized people do this to each other too. These sets of professors were of mixed gender. So women were rating women low, men were rating women low. It didn't matter. So we are kind of taught by society that some people, unfortunately, are worthless, not worthless, but worth less, or need fewer things, or are deserving of less things. So how diverse is tech now that we've kind of established the horrors of this situation? So if we look at, and I'm sorry that a lot of these examples are US-centric and women-centric. That just happens to be where a lot of the funding dollars come from. But if you look at this graph, for instance, you'll look at the difference between the tech population and the US population. And if you look around the room, I'm sure that it looks very similar to this. Women make up about half of what we do in the US population as we do in tech. For blacks, it's about half of the US population as exists in tech. And then for Hispanic, this is the scariest one. They're one of the largest groups in the United States, and they only make up a third of people, or a third of what they do in the US population in tech. So there's a lot of people missing here. So let's kind of dig deeper into one of those. So women make up about 24% of the industry, but only 3% of all open source contributors. Now think of how many jobs ask for you to have open source contributions before you even apply. Does that person even exist likely in your area or specifically for what you're looking for? And this isn't just us. This is all over the world, unfortunately. If we look at countries like India, about 8% of the people that are graduating with computer science degrees are women. The US, it's 17. This is actually dropping dramatically over the past 30 years. The UK, it's 18.2. France is 20. Brazil is 20. South Africa is 25. So you can see, like, this is all over the place. It's not just us. So there's nothing necessarily terrible about the way that we do things. It's a very big problem. And a lot of times, by the time I get to the point where I'm stating these statistics, somebody will say, well, maybe women just aren't interested in programming. Like, maybe, if they wanted to be there, they would. But the first compiler was written by a woman. The first programming language was written by a woman. So if women weren't interested in this, why would we invent it, right? Or they'll say, women aren't biologically predisposed to programming, which is probably my favorite reaction, because I know definitely that there have been programmers who have had their lives saved because they've been able to outrun a cheetah because they were such great programmers, right? It really helps. So, but science has told us that there's no physical or biological difference when it comes to race or gender with regards to how it impacts somebody's ability to program. So what does this mean for us? This is actually kind of great. Because it tells us that these are solvable things. These are purely social and cultural constructs, and we can overcome them. It's not something that we have to go into people's heads and fix them. We just have to learn how to deal with the situation and how to adapt. So one of the countries that I left out before in that group of countries where women were graduating from computer science was Bulgaria. And this was a statistic I was super shocked to find out. Like, I don't know, as an American with an American high school education, I don't know much about Bulgaria. I don't know that I've thought much about Bulgaria in my life, but I spent a lot of time researching Bulgaria after I found this. And I found that when kids are growing up, parents are just as likely to push girls into STEM fields, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, as they are boys. This is not something that's gendered to them. This is something that they see as really important to rebuild their country, to improve their economy, and to have a better society overall. And they think everybody is as equally likely to be able to do this. So we can get there. We just have to kind of focus on it a little bit. So why does diversity matter? And I mean, I met a lot of you. It's hard to see. But I met a lot of you the past day, and a lot of us fit into the same kind of groups. The vast majority of us are white. Very many of us are male. A lot of you fit the programmer stereotype that I like to call beard and glasses. So to you beard and glasses folks, why does diversity matter to you? Does it actually affect your life? Does it actually change the way that you go through life or your ability to do a good job or how successful you could be? And it does. It's actually kind of amazing how greatly it impacts all of us. Science has shown that as racial and gender diversity increases, sales revenue, number of customers, market share, and profits relative to competitors increase. How many people would like a raise today? Far fewer people raising their hands than I expected. Diverse teams are also able to solve complex problems better and faster, which is kind of important when you're a programmer. We're more creative and stimulated when we're exposed to minority viewpoints. And we also make better decisions and generate more innovation. Now, considering the fact that technology is on the cutting edge of everything, we are pushing forward every different kind of product in the world, all the different solutions when it comes to medicine, when it comes to different areas in science, when it comes to changing the way that we trade money, even on stock markets. This is extremely important. If we're going to be as innovative as we're able to be, and we know that we can do that by increasing the diversity, why aren't we? We know that the financial success and viability of a company are directly related to how diverse their teams are. And still, the vast majority of our teams are made up of beards and glasses. And I love beards and glasses. I love you guys, I really do. But I would like to see everybody be able to work with us, everybody able to work side by side with us. So why do we have the lack of diversity? I talk about this all over the place, and I talked about it last night at dinner and yesterday at lunch, and I talked about it in line. I talk about this all the time. It's something that's really important to me, and everybody always wants to know, like, but where's the real problem coming from? And there are a few different areas. One is the pipeline, so people coming in. We have these cultural cues that kind of tell us that geeks look a certain way, geeks act a certain way, they like certain things. And even as early as childhood, we're giving different toys to boys and girls and telling them that certain groups of people should be breaking things and remaking things and inventing things. So from a very early age, we're kind of programming this into kids. There aren't any famous role models to represent a lot of different kinds of people. We have a problem with access to technology where boys get their first computer at age 11. I have a lot of friends who will tell me gleefully, I did my first program when I was 6. And I'm like, that's awesome, congratulations. That's not the experience of most people, though. So how much longer have you been programming than maybe your female counterparts? Well, girls get their first computer at about age 14. That's a big difference, especially if you consider like puberty between 11 and 14. The amount of time that you spend sitting in your room because you really don't feel good about yourself and you're kind of freaking out about everything in your life, like that's a lot of good computer time, right? So, yes. So there's also lower computer ownership and adoption rates for broadband when it comes to African American and Hispanic households in the United States. But they also adopt smartphones at a much higher rate. So now think about work for a second. Think about whatever web app you have for work, and think about what your either mobile or your web app, your iOS app or Android app look like. Can you do as much as you can on the desktop version? How much more frustrating is it to try and do something on your phone than it would be if you just had a computer? I can't tell you how many times where I'm just like, whatever, I'm just going to wait until I can be on my computer because this is so frustrating, and it's just not worth the extra time it's going to take. That's very many people's experience with the internet as a whole. It's just a frustrating experience. So access to quality education is a big one. It's one of the greatest indicators of earning potential. We have a lot of poor neighborhoods in the United States that their libraries are being defunded, their schools are being shut down. Chicago had a ton of schools that were shut down, and kids are being bused to schools that are an hour and a half away. Think about adding an extra 3 hours to your school day every day. Think about the fact that a lot of schools require you to type up your homework now, and you don't have a computer at home and your library was shut down. Schools in poor neighborhoods have lower quality science and math programs. Studies have actually shown that there's a 25% difference between readiness of African American and Hispanic students as compared to white students when they get into college. So they're already basically a year behind. Now, consider how expensive college is. Consider the difference in wealth between those communities. Access to healthcare, when you look at groups like people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people, they'll have less access to quality healthcare. They're less likely to risk losing a job or moving to another job, even if it's more profitable and a better experience for them, because if they lose that healthcare or they risk a lapse in their healthcare, that could mean not having medication that could save their life. That could mean not being able to get their kids shots. Women are more likely to be caregivers, both of children and adult dependents. So when you're looking at having a business that asks people to work 50, 60 hours a week at the drop of a hat, and you have to go home and take care of an ailing parent, that greatly impacts whether or not you're going to go for that job or whether or not you're going to get a promotion because you're not putting in all those extra hours. So the second area is attraction. Like I said before, we kind of have a lack of role models. We're not seeing people that are like us represented in companies or at conferences or in the top of communities. And we're less likely to see people that are like us struggle as well, and that part is kind of important. We need to see people like us kind of overcome things that exist in society, because this isn't just a problem in tech, but it's kind of especially amplified in tech because there's such a lack of diversity. We need to see those people succeed, and we're not seeing them at the rates that we need to. We have this thing about a geek stereotype. Think back to every movie. I have this Tumblr blog called Geek Film Festival. It's like a list of all of these basically like hacker-esque movies, like anywhere there's a really smart computer programmer. And I can only think of 2 that have a female programmer in them. None of them have a programmer who's a person of color. So you have this kind of geek stereotype where they're beards and glasses, right? There's somebody who's socially awkward, which is a very unfortunate stereotype that we have, because many of us are not socially awkward. We're unpopular. We live in our parents' basements. We smell bad. We're really snarky and mean to each other. Now, imagine if you're thinking about what kind of job you want to go into for probably the rest of your career. Would that attract you if you didn't know any other geeks and you didn't know that that stereotype wasn't necessarily true? And then the stereotype hinders us. There was a study that was done at a university where they had a class of women, and they brought in somebody who met the geek stereotype. And this person taught their class, and they found that at the end of the year, more than half of the women had dropped out. Now, the interesting thing is the gender of the person who met that geek stereotype didn't matter. If it was a woman or if it was a man, it was irrelevant. If they could not see themselves in that person that was teaching them, they were automatically thinking, am I going to fit in? Am I going to have any friends here? I'm so different. Am I going to be miserable the entire time I'm in this career because I'm just going to feel so isolated? So attrition is the third area. This is a statistic that really scares me. 56% of women leave tech within 10 years. And this is twice the rate of men, and this is accounting for women leaving for childcare or for having children. So why are women leaving at such a greater rate than men? And this is a really interesting kind of ramp up too. Like, the longer you're in the industry, the more likely you are to leave. I'm very happy that I've been able to defy this, but I feel like I fight against it every day. And I can't tell you how many times that I've said to myself, this is going to be the thing that is going to make me not want to program anymore. I am not going to want to do this anymore because I'm just so miserable, and I don't want to feel this way every single day waking up trying to do something that I love. The other thing is harassment, and this is something that is really difficult for me to talk about. This past week, there was a horrific act of violence against a female programmer in another community. And both of them are programmers, and I watched as a lot of people stood up for the person who attacked her. And I also watched as they turned around and attacked her for coming forward. And that's horrifying, absolutely horrifying. About 2 months ago, I asked people if they had ever experienced sexual harassment or any other kind of harassment at work, if they went forward to HR or to a boss about it, if they would contact me and let me know what happened. 25 people responded. 23 of the 25 were fired in the following 3 months after reporting. So we have these mechanisms for reporting, but it doesn't say much if we're willing to kind of drop these people off a pier after they do. It's really, really terrifying. People in marginalized groups are twice as likely to be harassed or mistreated. Men are half as likely to even notice that, I'm sorry, not just men, people that aren't in marginalized communities are half as likely to notice that people are getting harassed. A lot of this stuff is really subtle. It's hard to see. This is something that is kind of shocking to me, because after being in the industry for 12 years, I have a lot of stories. I think that if you talk to any person of color, if you talk to any woman or any LGBTQ person or any person with disabilities, you'll hear horror stories from them about all these things that have happened to them, and they've kind of pushed through it because they're just like, whatever, some people are jerks, I can deal with it. And everybody has those stories, and it's sad to me that we have to have those stories, and we kind of have to push through. This is something extra that we have to do on top of our jobs every day, on top of dealing with some jerk in the issue queues on GitHub. This is something extra on top of all of that. So, discrimination, we have a problem with pay advancement and job offers for these marginalized people. Men are 2.7 times more likely than women to be promoted to high-ranking jobs. And this is considering the fact that they're equally likely to be in middle management. And I hear a lot of people say, I had to work hard to get where I am. And they should too. And I totally understand that. I don't discount that you had to work really hard to where you are. I had to work really hard too. But when you're piling on top all of these other things, think about how much harder people have to work just to exist in this industry every single day. So like I said, I don't discount that you had to work hard, but kind of piling all these extra things onto these people makes it so much more difficult. So what can we do to help this stuff? What can we do to stop it? I know a lot of people have asked me that, like, I don't want to be part of the problem. I don't think I'm part of the problem. What can I do to change this stuff? And the cool thing is that we can change it, and it starts with all of us. Education is the Trojan horse to empathy. A lot of people are not going to seek out this information on their own. So let them know these statistics. Let them know, ask people to tell their stories. Help encourage people. Get to know people that are different than you. I play this game when I go to conferences because I'm actually, like, as outgoing as I seem, I'm actually a really anxious, nervous person when it comes to new people. So I'll kind of find the people that I'm comfortable with and I'll kind of glom onto them and like very shyly walk around with them and be like, please introduce me to people, this is really weird and scary. And I totally get that. So don't feel like I'm forcing you out of your comfort zone. So I play this game where I pick a color at the beginning of every day. And whoever is wearing that color, I have to go up and talk to them. So I'll say, okay, I'll pick yellow, which because a lot of people don't wear yellow, so start yourself easy, right? So I'll go up and talk to every person that's wearing yellow. So I know that I'm not discriminating about who I'm going up to based on what they look like or if I haven't seen them around before, because anybody can wear yellow. And remember that bias and discrimination are often subtle. I tell my stories about the kind of experiences that I've had to my grandmother, because my grandmother is also a programmer, which I didn't realize until about 10 years ago, and I thought that was awesome. And she said, you know, when I was a programmer, all of the programmers were women. And I worked at this insurance company in Chicago, and we all worked in the middle of the office in a steel cage that locked from the inside. And like my jaw's on the floor, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like maybe you dreamed this, because this does not even sound like a real thing. It's very scary sounding. And she said it was because they couldn't, their managers found that they weren't getting as much work done because men would come up and talk to them and harass them and touch them. So they had to be locked in a cage like zoo animals. So I was like, well, on the plus side, I'm not locked in a cage every day. So thank you. Thank you for contributing to that. I appreciate it. There's a lot of progress that has been made. but that kind of thing isn't, that overt stuff isn't necessarily what's happening anymore. A lot of people know that like when somebody's walking by, slapping them on the ass isn't a thing you're supposed to do, right? And the problem is that that's what we're educating people for. We're saying, you know, this kind of touching people is not okay. And most people don't do that, so that's awesome. But I also want to help kind of reinforce the idea that a lot of this stuff is subtle. I travel with a lot of different friends, and I'm kind of interested to see the reactions that people have to them versus to me. Like I quite often, people, especially before I had bright hair, would ask like, oh, so he's your boyfriend? What do you do? I'm like, no, actually we're just friends, and we speak at conferences together, but we're not together at all. Or I spoke at a conference relatively recently, and I went on stage and said, hi, I'm a programmer, this is what I do, la la la. And then at the after party, 3 people came up and asked me if I was a project manager. Now, did they mean something mean by that? No, of course not. They just wanted to know what I did for a living and wanted to have a conversation with me. But at what point in time am I allowed to be upset when people keep coming up to me and assuming, you don't look like me, so I assume you don't do the same kind of stuff that I do. And I know a lot of people that are like you do that other thing. Like, at what point am I allowed to be upset that people think that I can't do what they do? And I don't want to get crabby at people because they assume I'm a project manager, because there's nothing wrong with being a project manager, and they don't mean it maliciously, but it kind of hurts me too. So one of the things we can do is learn to apologize. This is something that I'm trying really hard to get better at. I don't want anybody to think that I'm perfect in any of this stuff. So apologizing is really easy. It's just like making ice, if you've ever seen the recipe online for making ice, which is very easy. It's get an ice cube tray, fill it with water, shocker, put it in the freezer, right? Cool, awesome. So making ice is easy, so is apologizing. And the more we do it, the easier it is. So the 3 steps for apology are, what I did was wrong, I'm sorry, I'll try my best to not do it again. Pretty easy stuff. So it's a really good way to diffuse a situation. We can talk about these issues openly. It gives people around us more power to stand up if they see things going wrong, but it also educates the people that are standing on the sidelines trying to see, I don't really know how I feel about this. I don't know enough about it to kind of jump in. When somebody does something wrong, especially online, like I should almost have this a macro in Twitter, just that's not cool. And actually, I've seen that this has worked quite a lot. Like I have a friend that was talking about something being retarded, and I hate that word. Like it's something that I used a lot when I was younger, and when I became an adult, quite a few years after I was an adult actually, somebody said, hey, you shouldn't say that word. Like I was really embarrassed, my face turned red, and my first reaction was to get defensive. I'm like, I'm not a bad person, like that's just a word that everybody uses. But I've tried really hard, and I'm happy that I've eradicated that word from my language. But it's hard to do. Like guys is another word that I'm trying to stop saying because we use it to mean like a group of people of any gender, but when you like are walking down the street and you say, hey, I met these two guys, you assume that they're both male. So that's just that thing I'm trying to stop saying that's really hard. We can have hard conversations, influence change in our communities and workplaces, talk about the kinds of things that other people face. We can increase education and access. Somebody asked me yesterday, I'm the parent of a daughter, what can I do? Because I don't want her to go through this stuff. You're actually, girls with parents in STEM are statistically way more likely to also follow their parents into STEM. So just be there. Talk to them about what you do and give them the access to the stuff that you do. You can help facilitate events for marginalized people in tech. There's awesome groups like Black Girls Code, Latino startups, Black entrepreneurs, Girl Develop It, Rails Bridge, Rails Girls. Get involved, give them money, give them space to meet, help connect them with other people in the community. You can volunteer at local schools and groups. Please do this at schools and groups that don't normally have access to this information. You probably don't need to go into rich neighborhoods and talk to them about computers because they have super nice computer labs, right? You can commit financial resources. How many of you are donating money to your college or like alma mater right now? A few of you, okay. Do you think that they still need all that money? There are a lot of technical colleges, historical Black colleges, women's colleges that could use that money a lot more. So think about, even if you want to continue to donate, maybe split that donation with another institution that could use the money more. You can work with colleges and universities to kind of decrease their biases by asking them, what are you doing to help students who've had less access to technology? We can remove bias from our educational institutions in a really easy way. Harvey Mudd, I urge you to look up Harvey Mudd. They did a really cool thing where they increased the number of female CS grads by asking one question. Have you programmed before? If they hadn't, they put them in another room so they all were with their peers, and it was a safe place to learn. They didn't feel like these people are so far ahead of me, I'm dumb, I'm never gonna get this. And it was so simple for them to do. We can change our workplaces, especially if you think about what the about page of your website looks like right now. There's this awesome Tumblr, and by awesome I mean absolutely horrific, called 100% Men. And it's a Tumblr of all of these businesses that we really respect and we use their products and their services. And almost all of them, all of the executives, all of the people on management, almost all the people that work there are almost all men, almost all white men. We can change our culture. It's a lot harder to retain than recruit in our companies. You can think of your culture as a garden. You want to value variety and prune the weeds. Just because somebody is an awesome programmer doesn't mean they're not hurting other people. We can change our job listing languages and requirements to make sure that they're not gendered, remove things like he, guy, dude, man, bro. A lot of those things turn people off, men and women. Don't require a CS degree. As I pointed out before, a lot of women do not have CS degrees. A lot of people of color do not have CS degrees. If on top of that you're requiring that they've made open source contributions, that person doesn't exist, okay? We can check to make sure our benefits are inclusive of same-sex partners, that we have trans-inclusive healthcare, that we have maternity and paternity leave policies that are kind on both parents, offering flex time to make sure that people can get to medical appointments and that kind of thing. Make sure that people are being paid equally by doing a regular payroll audit. Do things like mentoring and career goal attainment, asking people when they come in, what do you ultimately want to be doing? Is there somewhere else you would like to be trained? And automatically you set them up with a mentor and give them some time every month to work on that thing. So, kind of wrapping up, like I said before, all of us kind of have to participate in this. I can't do it by myself. There are a lot of other people that are working really hard to fix this problem, a lot of people that are working really hard to be role models, a lot of people that are struggling just to stay in the industry. So please, please help us with this. If you want to find out more about how, you can talk to me. I'll be here, unfortunately, only until about 4 o'clock, but you can hit me up on Twitter, or you can shoot me an email. I would love to talk to you. And just think about what we can accomplish together. So thank you.